Welcome to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm Jennifer Jelliff-Russell, author, speaker, and entrepreneur, bringing you actionable ideas and interviews with awesome women to help you pursue your dreams and achieve your goals. You can find more episodes of the Go Find Out podcast by visiting gofindoutpodcast.com. Enjoy the show and go find out. Welcome back to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Jelliff-Russell, and this is episode number 62. In today's solo show, I'll be talking about the power of self-talk and how we can use it to our advantage. But first, let's jump into my personal update. Hello, listeners. So you'll be quite happy to hear that I finally got our garlic into the ground before it got too cold here in Maine to do so. It only took me like 2 or 3 weeks of procrastination to get it done, so that's not too bad. On the writing front, things are in full swing on NaNoWriMo, which is a challenge to write 50,000 words in 1 month. I decided to make my NaNoWriMo challenge to write book 4 in the Artemis Necklace series, and it's been really fun getting back to my clueless vampire hunter and her snarky hellhound sidekick. I also tend to be more of a pantser, which is where I just don't plan out what's going to happen in the story, so I don't like outline or anything. And it's always fun to sort of watch the story unfold. I just actually hit 20,000 words today, and now I have a much better idea about what's going to be happening overall in the story, although the details, they sort of just reveal themselves to me as I write, so it's super fun. I was actually a little behind my daily word count for a bit, and I was really struggling to keep up. I kind of had to shift my way of thinking in order to get caught up again. But we'll actually talk more about that in the meat of the show and how that relates to self-talk. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and jump into the show. So today, let's talk about one of the best tools in your arsenal for getting through difficult situations and tackling tough tasks, and that is self-talk. So self-talk, it's basically our own internal dialogue, usually about ourselves. For me, when I'm practicing self-talk, it doesn't exactly stay internal. I usually end up just sort of talking out loud to myself, which is fine when I'm working from home, but maybe not so great when I am, doing my one day at the office. Makes things a little awkward at times. But here's the thing. Pretty much everyone uses self-talk already. It's basically just our ongoing internal dialogue, and we do it so frequently that we don't even really notice it anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of self-talk is negative. It's us telling ourselves that we're not smart enough or pretty enough or that we won't be able to do something well enough. Some of the things that we tell ourselves are ingrained beliefs about ourselves that aren't even necessarily true. For example, I have a bad habit of negative self-talk around math. Even though I generally made straight A's in all my math classes, at some point I decided that I'm not great at math because I don't effortlessly crunch numbers in my head. But give me a scrap of paper to work on or a calculator and I'm fine. So why do I tell myself that I'm bad at math? One way to combat negative self-talk, like my example, is to first ask yourself why you have that belief. Is it because you had one bad experience and you've decided, based off that one experience, what your abilities around that topic are? Sometimes stopping and looking at our self-talk like this can make us realize how unrealistic that self-talk is, especially if it's based off of one single incident. Another way to combat self-talk is to stop and ask yourself, is this thought really true? Going back to my math example, when I tell myself, oh, I'm bad at math, then I stop and I actually sort of dig in to see if that's true. I realize, like I mentioned before, that it's not that I'm bad at math, it's just that I'm not a whiz at quickly crunching numbers in my head. However, when given the time to do the calculations, I'm fine. Lastly, a great way to counter-argue against your negative self-talk is to see if you can think of any examples of when the opposite was true. So still sticking with my bad at math example, I might think back to my straight A's in school and realize that my negative self-talk isn't true. Or I might remember that I once tutored college students in basic college level math once upon a time when I worked for AmeriCorps. So thinking about all this, is it really true that I'm bad at math? The answer is no. So instead of telling myself I'm bad at it, instead I might shift my self-talk to something like, I'm good at math when I can take my time doing it. Totally different, right? So let's apply this to something else. As I mentioned in my personal update, November is National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, where writers challenge themselves to write 50,000 words toward a book or project in the month of November. Now, I've successfully completed this challenge a few times in the past, and almost every time, without fail, I find myself falling behind around week 2 of the challenge. And just like before, I start to tell myself that I'll never catch up and that it's not worth it to try because I'm so far behind. If I were on the last week of the challenge and I was short like 20,000 words to reach that 50,000 word goal, I could maybe accept that it's just not going to happen this year, right? But I was less than 2 weeks into the challenge, which means there's still plenty of time for me to catch up over the next 2 weeks of the challenge. So why was I freaking out and starting to really get into the negative self-talk that I won't finish? In order to get my shit together so I wouldn't quit the challenge, I shifted my self-talk. If I write every day, the daily word count goal is about 1,500 words, maybe a little bit more than that. But when I fall behind, the daily word count goal goes up so that I'll still reach that 50,000 words by the end of the month. The more that I fell behind on the daily words written, the higher my daily goal became each day. So after skipping a few days of writing to handle other responsibilities, I needed to write 1,800 words a day to be on track. That's actually not too bad in the grand scheme of things. The problem was I wasn't looking at it that way. I wasn't looking at how many words that I needed to write per day. Instead, I was telling myself that in order to catch up, I needed to triple that for a few days in order to catch up to where I would have been before if I hadn't skipped a few days of writing. I have to tell you, trying to write 3,000 to 4,000 words a day while also, running my career coaching business and working a part-time job and doing this podcast was a little overwhelming. So what happened? I started to skip days again, thereby making my problem worse. My negative self-talk flared up and I really started to wonder if I was going to be able to finish the challenge because I was so busy, just trying to keep up. I ended up having to regroup and review what was going on with my self-talk. Only then did I realize that it wasn't that I was too busy to keep up, it's that I was making the challenge too hard for myself by focusing on the big end goal of 50,000 words and trying to catch up in a few days rather than catching up over time, because I still have plenty of time to catch up if I write 1,800 words a day, which is kind of a bite-sized piece, and I can keep up with that. By ratcheting my focus down to knock out what my daily word count goal was, I've really been able to reliably write every day instead of psyching myself out and skipping more days. So hacking your self-talk can be really helpful for going after goals that you might think are too out of reach. Rather than immediately cutting yourself off from going after something like that, try to reframe it and insert some positive self-talk into the situation. Shifting from a thought of, I've never tried X, so I won't be very good at it, to instead tell yourself, I've never tried X, so I might be really good at it and I just don't know it yet, right? That can be really empowering just to have that shift in what you're telling yourself. I will also say that sometimes my mood or situational circumstances can affect my ability to shift my self-talk to something more positive. For example, I actually enjoy running once I'm about like a mile into a run. But when I wake up in the morning, if I start thinking about how I need to go for a run, then I start to tell myself that I don't actually like running. Same goes with any kind of exercise. If I think about it too much beforehand, I'll actually convince myself that I don't like it, and I will figure out an excuse to not go for a run or to not work out. This applies to more than just physical tasks. Sometimes I have moments where I'm just in a really negative funk, and in those times, I have a ton of negative self-talk around everything. When that happens, I try one of two things. First, I might get a second opinion from a friend about that thing. So, for example, if I'm feeling like there's no point in going after a goal because I think I'm bad at that particular thing or bad at a skill required to reach that goal, I'll reach out to a friend and get their input on my abilities around that goal. And huge side note here, folks, this is one reason it is so important to surround yourself with supportive friends. If you ask someone who tends to be jealous of others' success, you'll only get more negativity added to your self-talk from them. The second way to deal with being in a negative funk is to consider not making any kind of decision while you're feeling that way. Now, I know that this isn't always possible if there are, time constraints on what you'd like to go after or what you're trying to do. But if you're able to push something off even a few hours or days until you're feeling a little more positive, then that can be tremendously helpful. For example, when I go to cold email a potential guest for the show, if I am in one of those negative funks, sometimes I tell myself, what am I doing? Am I even good at interviewing? Should I be reaching out to this person? Will they even want to come on the show? When I'm in that kind of funk, right, that negative self-talk way of thinking about the podcast, then I will actually put off asking somebody to come on the show for a few days until I feel more positive about myself and my abilities. And usually it's just a phase that I'm going through, and I feel a lot better a few days later, and then I'm able to reach out to lots of guests to ask them to come on the show. And like I mentioned before, sometimes reframing it, to remind myself, hey, Jenny, the majority of the people that you asked to come on the show, and they're excited to be on. And it's a fun interview. I think I've only had less than a handful of guests who just didn't respond. And that's pretty normal. And reminding myself of that really helps me to kind of get into sometimes a better or more positive state of mind where I will have more positive self-talk around asking people to come on the show. But on those days when I just cannot seem to shift my way of thinking to something more positive because I'm in some sort of funk, then I have learned not to make any big decisions, since I know that those decisions will be negatively affected by my mood rather than logic. And rather than stewing on what feels like an inability or a failure, I tell myself that I'll make that decision at another time when I'm in a happier or healthier state of mind. So next time you catch yourself using negative self-talk, stop and question that negative assumption about yourself. Then see if you can flip it into more positive self-talk that will help you achieve whatever your goal is. And if you're in a state of mind where you can't seem to shift away from that negative self-talk, move on from that thing if possible and come back to it later when you're in a better state of mind. All right, listeners, that is all for our show today. Join me next time when I interview copywriter and blogger Colleen Welsh about her journey of becoming a successful freelance copywriter. Until then, go find out. Thanks for listening to the show today. I hope you found the information beneficial and that it helps you tackle your own Go Find Out goals. You can find more episodes and the show transcripts at gofindoutpodcast.com. You can also let me know what you thought of the show by tweeting me at GFOpodcast or follow me on Instagram at GoFindOutPodcast. That's it for today. Now go find out.